As nations across the globe begin to ease off the lockdown and allowing businesses to gradually open up, many are yet to come up to terms with reopening schools. Welcome to this edition of Foreign Dispatches on Channels Television. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Anne Nwawadu. While the adults grapple with the big issues about the COVID-19 pandemic, children in many countries around the world are also finding it very difficult to cope with not being able to deal with the usual things they do, like going to school or even just running free at the parks. We spoke to a number of children in Johannesburg in South Africa who interestingly know the basics of keeping safe from the coronavirus, but still wonder when they will get back to schools. Play dates are just a fun day at their favorite fast food restaurant. A South Africa bureau chief, Betty Dibia, reports.
It's been 2 months of the lockdown in South Africa. For the children, home has become the theatre of play. From drive-thrus to video games and, of course, the little fights.
Coronavirus is a disease. It's a virus that attacks the world.
Classrooms remain empty and so have the playgrounds. 8-year-old Yolanda Ndlovu spends most of her time watching TV and playing with her cousin Spelele. Even taking makeup lessons after schoolwork, her school sends online. She's pained by the situation.
Coronavirus is abusing me. I'm not going to school. I'm not going to play with my friends. I'm not going to do my hair.
Here is Clarice Kobongo, and she's got company.
Clarice, and this is named Stunky.
For many parents, it's a hectic day's job, keeping children occupied, working from home, and maintaining a semblance of sanity. However, the sound of sending the children back to school from next month, albeit in a phased manner, as planned by government, has not been welcomed by many.
I don't think it's advisable for kids to be allowed to go back to school because these kids, they are meant to be under surveillance. Under us, the adult to look after them. So when the government approved for them to go back to school, I think they are not helping the fight to contain the spread of the virus because they, as children, they don't know what you're talking about. They are too small. Their brain haven't gotten to that extent to know how to avoid or how to stay 1 meter away from each other. So I think it's not advisable for government to allow them to go back to school, not for now. Maybe when the spread of the virus is a bit lower, then we can allow them to go back to school because we're fighting against disease that we cannot see and against disease that we don't know what the solution to it and when it will come. So I think it's not advisable for them to go back to school.
I think it's a good idea to delay it. I think children carry germs and it would be a quick way to spread the virus if they open too soon.
Meanwhile, the Minister for Basic Education in South Africa, Angie Motshekga, says her department shares the concerns of everyone, but that government's decisions are guided by facts from scientists.
The National Coronavirus Command Council and Cabinet have approved the reopening of schools as of June 1, 2020. We will start with grade 7s and 12, but also we will also look at small schools and special schools differently because we may not be able to use the same measurement for all those other sectors. So all learners, educators and support staff will receive orientation and training at the start of the school reopening, which starts for grade 7s and 12. We are aware that the impact of the virus also, or the lockdown on families and societies in general, has really created unprecedented pressure and anxiety. And therefore, we've put plans in place to make sure that we can provide social, mental, psychological, and emotional support. We're working close with the Department of Health and the Department of Social Development. In addition to this, the basic education sector, using its own psychologists and social workers who had prior training on counseling, will also come on board to assist us.
While the adults grapple with efforts to resolve the big issues, the young try to cope without their normal life and the people in it.
I wish that everyone would stay safe and be considerate, not only to human beings, but to animals too. And I hope that everyone builds great bonds and relationships.
I am Griffin.
And here's 5-year-old Griffin, who took out time from his extremely busy schedule to record a special message for his friends and the world.
I would like to say to everyone, stay at home and be safe. I wish for the world to be healed.
From Johannesburg, South Africa, Betty Dibia for Foreign Dispatches.
Elsewhere, schools are reopening with most pupils back in their classes after several months of staying away. Some nations are entering the second phase of the lockdown exit, thereby allowing more institutions open up.
In Vélizy-Villacoublay near Paris and the southern France city of Nice, pupils had to observe new rules, which include queuing 1 meter away from each other before entering class, and also washing their hands regularly and sitting at a distance from each other.
I think it will be complicated for some children to respect the rules, but then we've done everything to make sure the sanitary rules are respected. I'm always in support of the families, and I won't let down any Vélizy resident who would not be able to work because they haven't found a solution for their child.
French authorities issued a 54-page sanitary protocol which citizen schools must comply with before reopening. Teachers at Mozart School will have to provide classes to children on the premises, but also online for all those who remain at home. But in other parts of France, mayors have decided to postpone the reopening of their schools, while others will keep them closed until further notice. Other parents have decided to keep their children at home for fear of the virus. A small group of children aged between 6 to 10 years old returned to school for the first time since lockdown, but in makeshift classrooms inside a public gym as part of a test pilot to see how social distancing can work in schools throughout the northern Italian region of Piemonte. Mothers were delighted and relieved that their children could finally return to school after 2 months studying at home in the small town of Borgo Sesia, near Turin. Children and parents are required to wear masks, and mothers were given sanitization equipment upon arrival. Inside the makeshift school, gym halls have been transformed into classrooms, with desks placed at least 1 meter apart to ensure social distancing for a limited number of pupils.
We have to find a way that these children can play together and we can go to work. We've now been at home for 2 months. Grandfather can't take care of them every day, all day. They are still small. They need to stay with other children. They really need this. We've managed up until now. Now they've given us this possibility to go to school, which is fundamental to us.
Schools in Italy are planning to stay shut for the rest of the academic year, but Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte has said he hopes they might open in September in the best possible way. Although cafes were open and people had their morning coffee, still an abundance of rules to prevent a second coronavirus wave, from shifts for school classes to number limits in restaurants, showed that life was too far from normal. Only students in the last 2 years of high school returned for face-to-face classes, lining up outside school gates for temperature checks before going in.
These safety measures make sense. You have to have them because we need face-to-face classes to prepare for exams. They have to be conscious of the fact that none of this was done to limit their liberties. They need to be responsible about how they handle their freedom here at school.
Emboldened by the slowdown of cases, The government said the country was ready for the second phase of its exit plan. That meant opening kindergartens, shops up to 400 square meters, schools, restaurants, museums, and art galleries. In the UK, the Education Minister Gavin Williamson defends the government's plans to partially reopen schools on June the 1st. Williamson says schools will need to adopt a number of protective measures like reducing class sizes and implementing strict hygiene standards. The first children set to return to school are primary school children in reception, Year 1 and Year 6, while the government aims to bring back two-year groups, 10 and 12, back to secondary school as they are facing GCSE and A-level exams in 2021.
And we're asking schools to adopt a number of strict protective measures. This includes reducing class sizes, making sure pupils stay within these small groups, creating a protective and small bubble around them. Schools will also be rigorous about hygiene, cleaning and hand washing. School staff can already be tested for the virus, but from the 1st of June, we'll extend that to cover children and their families if any of them develop symptoms.
Well, it's not the same situation in the United States, where the biggest U.S. university system makes fall term virtual.
As uncertainty about the spread of COVID-19 continues, the biggest university system in the United States decides to make fall-term classes virtual. One of the first to do so, amid fears of a second wave of infections in the month ahead.
Yay!
California State University says almost all classes across its 23 university campuses will be online, at least until the end of the fall term. Programs such as the Maritime Academy, which holds classes aboard a training ship, may be among a handful of exceptions. The Cal State University system serves 482,000 students.
As the largest four-year system of higher education in the country, that the spotlight is on us in terms of the decision. We weren't hoping to influence anyone, but this is a decision that the chancellor and the campus presidents arrived at that we feel is in the best interest of our students and our employees.
Colleges and universities across the United States are grappling with similar decisions with plans for summer. But Cal State's announcement has come to some as a surprise. COVID-19 has infected more than 1.4 million Americans and killed over 85,000, according to figures made public. Efforts to stem the spread of the disease have shut schools and businesses nationwide, severely disrupted travel, and causing economic ruins. Top U.S. infectious disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci has warned that the second wave of infections is a near certainty in the fall, which helped influence Cal State's decision, according to a statement by the chancellor.
I want to make sure that people understand that we're not closed. The campuses are not closed. There are a number of students that remain on the campuses. We have students in some of the housing facilities. One of the efforts to flatten the curve, we asked students who had the opportunity to go home to be with their families. But if you had nowhere to go, you were welcome to stay. And we're going to provide the best possible level of service to those students that we can. And this is another extension of that.
Cal State University's moved to online classes on March the 17th. Students who could go home were asked to do so. Those who couldn't were permitted to remain on campus.
The social aspect is definitely a really good way to kind of decompress and not always be worried about something going on in one of your classes. And I definitely miss it. And it's not like, I know that my college friends are from all over the state and if not country, so it's not like I can see most of them, even if this wasn't going on. But it's also on top of that, it's like, okay, I was only gone 6 months. I know my high school friends are back in town too, and it's like I can't see them either. So it's like the social aspect is just completely gone, and I do very much miss it.
Some students who have moved back home are now living with their families in different time zones, which can be a problem for classes with fixed times.
It's going to be weird, particularly because a lot of the art classes that I take are lab classes, they're studio classes. So a lot of this instruction is going to be is intended for person to person. If you have a professor there to critique your technique and work, then it makes learning how to do things a lot easier than trying to just do them without instruction and having your professor grid the end result.
Moving online has been costly for the universities. Cal State's Board of Trustees discussed an estimated $337 million in new costs and revenue losses for the spring term due to COVID-19.
Moving away from school resumptions in some nations, let's talk about Belgium and Greece. They are gradually opening up, but strictly with masked faces.
The country of 11.5 million people, among the worst affected by COVID-19 pandemic, has until now only permitted food shops and pharmacies to operate throughout the crisis, and more recently, home improvement and garden centers. Adults and older children taking public transport were obliged to wear a mask, while a default attracted €250 fine. Shops selling fabric and sewing supplies were also allowed to open to allow the public make their own masks. The public may also now expand their range of leisure activities beyond walking, jogging and cycling to include sports where physical distancing is possible. Belgium has confirmed over 50,000 COVID-19 cases and over 7,000 deaths from the highly contagious respiratory disease. But the rate of increase of new cases, hospital admissions and deaths have fallen steadily since peaks in early April. Meanwhile, Greeks took to the streets as the lockdown restrictions imposed 6 weeks ago were eased. People flooded onto the subway wearing masks as police carried out inspections to ensure passengers were complying with social distancing and mask regulations in shops and public transport. Permission forms for movement are no longer required, and people headed to bookshops and hair salons. Greece, which only emerged in 2018 from a debt crisis that wiped out a quarter of its economic output, is desperate to let businesses reopen.
Personally, I feel like I'm just starting my business again. Even though it's been 40 years, I'm back to zero. The future is unknown. We are in uncharted waters. We don't know if we will close again. If the business will continue, everything is unsure.
We are proceeding with the gradual release of society and the economy from the stranglehold of the restrictive measures. Greeks complied to the lockdown with discipline and a very strong sense of responsibility and solidarity.
Economy from the stranglehold of the restrictive measures, Greeks also headed to beaches as public beaches were opened.
A delivery service that provides residents of Moscow with ready meals in jars amidst the coronavirus lockdown is expanding just to keep pace with increasing demand. This and other related stories on food supplies coming up next.
Alexander Kasanov launched his restaurant from a jar business in the Russian capital just days before Moscow ordered residents to stay at home. Popular jars include beef stroganoff, rabbit sausage in broth, and a bachelor's choice selection featuring marinated pork cubes cooked over an open fire. Moscow's restaurants and bars are all closed, and residents are only allowed to whet their appetites by venturing to their nearest food store to stock up on groceries or by using a food or restaurant delivery service. Kasanov's company is based in Yekaterinburg, east of the Russian capital, where he says it built over 2,000 customers within 2.5 years.
Our output is growing. We are preparing to open another kitchen. and we'll have more jobs.
The price for a jarred ready meal that serves 2 and takes minutes to warm up ranges from 380 rubles, that is $5 for soup, to $8 for a meat dish. Customers can choose from more than 100 restaurant quality dishes, which include Russian, Indian, Armenian, Uzbek, and other cuisines. The jarred meals are certified by Russia's food quality watchdog and can be stored for up to 1 year. Kasanov, who plans to open in other cities such as St. Petersburg, said he expected demand would remain high even after the lockdown ended because people would tend to work more, have less time for cooking, and less money for eating out. He said the convenience factor meant such delivery services could give restaurants a run for their money.
A Swiss violinist is keeping the spirit of the elderly ones lifted as the high-risk group try to remain healthy, safe and sane.
At a retirement home in northern Mexico of Nuevo Leon, at least 47 residents and 3 workers have been infected with COVID-19. Nuevo Leon's health minister, Manuel de Lao, said the infections were registered amongst the 98 residents and 48 workers at the Casa de Retiro Luis Elizondo in the municipality of Guadalupe, east of state capital Monterrey. He said in a news conference that the average age of residents at the home is 84 and that 40% of them had diabetes, while 45% suffered from hypertension, calling them a high-risk group. The home's medical director, Fernando Coindro, said staff began to notice symptoms among some older residents on May the 2nd before the tests were carried out. Nursing homes have been some of the worst hit places during the pandemic, particularly in continental Europe. The audience are massed and scattered around a garden while a security tape separates the performers from them. But the emotion flowed through. Swiss violinist Deborah von Weiler performed in front of the residents of a retirement home foundation in Zurich, bringing at least one of them to tears. Despite the easing of curbs in Switzerland, elderly people are considered at risk and are encouraged by the federal government to stay home. The care home's residents are all over 65 years old and have hardly left their apartments for weeks. To cheer them up, the administration decided to organize various concerts like the one von der Weiler gave. As Switzerland is starting to ease COVID-19 restrictions, the situation for the elderly will not change much in the coming weeks. Switzerland has reported a little over 30,000 cases of COVID-19 and around 1,500 deaths, but caseloads are easing and some cities have begun to relax measures by allowing shops to open.
And on that note, we draw the curtains on Foreign Dispatches for this week. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget you can keep up with all our top stories on channelstv.com. I'll see you again next time. Keep safe and stay healthy. I am Anne Nwawadu. See you soon.